IMERSA team for welcoming us here today. We're really happy to talk a little bit about the Infinite. It's a location-based experience that really redefines the standard of large-scale exhibition. I'm curious to know before we start if any one of you has the chance to experiment the Infinite. Yes, only one person. Okay, just for those of you who are in the West Coast, the project is actually presented in San Francisco. We just opened this week.
Yep.
Last week already, and we are going to be there until April 16th. So if you have a chance to go in the Bay Area, it's a good stop to do. Maybe just for those of you who have not seen, we're just going to show you a little bit a walkthrough video, very short, to give you an idea before we start talking about the project. Of course. Okay, maybe full screen. And is there sound? No sound. Okay, no sound.
Okay, that helped. Thank you.
Okay, so pretty short, just a small overview.
Where do I get the soundtrack?
Yeah. It's quite expensive. I have to do it every time. And, you have to pay for all my travels. And,
He didn't.
Yeah.
Just use a cassette tape.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. Going back again. We need to exit. No.
No.
I think I'm gonna
Hit escape.
technical
Are you trying to
failure.
exit the player?
Yeah.
Escape.
So maybe just this project started with Felix and Paul having the idea of filming in space. And I would, maybe Paul, it would be good if you explain to us, you know, how did you came to send a camera and a crew inside of the International Space Station? Because all of the project is really starting with this.
Yeah, so the desire to film in space came pretty much as soon as we began working in VR. So that's close to 10 years ago now. When we started the studio, we did our first VR experience, which was shot right here in Montreal with Patrick Watson, a musician, in his studio playing on the piano. And we started showing this and realizing, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to dedicate our lives to immersive filmmaking, immersive storytelling, and we started building the studio. But we knew that the ultimate thing we had to do one day somehow is get a camera to float above the Earth and to bring this experience to everyone back here on Earth. So of course, it took a little while to get there. We started by trying to reach out to NASA, to the Canadian Space Agency. We eventually did. We started having conversations with them, started developing a relationship, started the Space Explorers project, which initially was shot on Earth. It was the first few episodes of Space Explorers were about astronaut training, telling the story of this new era of private and public collaboration in the space sector. And after a few years of working with them and them realizing the potential of virtual reality, despite its small audience, there was clearly the most impactful way of telling these stories. And so we finally, through the coincidence that Time magazine was also trying to film a spacewalk in virtual reality, we collaborated forces, and after many years of technical development and all the crazy misadventures you could imagine, we finally managed to get a camera up on the ISS. We filmed for multiple cameras. These were, we have a history of designing cameras as well as content, and in this case we actually modified a pre-existing camera, which was the Zcam V1 Pro, to shoot in microgravity. We also designed a more robust model to shoot outside the ISS for the spacewalk. And so yeah, we spent over 2 years shooting on and off the ISS. Before we knew it, this had become the largest media project of any kind ever shot in space, not just in VR or 360. So that was amazing, and and with that really comes all the support, right? That's over 2.5, 3 years of support of all these astronauts, of all hundreds of people at NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, and industries, space agencies around the world. And what also ended up happening is that we, as we started exploring different ways of getting this footage out there, right? Virtual reality remains a small audience, at least at home. We started thinking of different ways of getting this in front of people, right? And so this is where the idea to adapt to Dome, as some of you saw yesterday, and the infinite. So basically bringing it to people rather than waiting for an industry to emerge. And yeah, I think that's...
One of the things that was really interesting in the footage that they captured is that there's about 20 hours of astronaut interview logs, and in those interviews, the astronaut really open up about their view on humanity, on the purpose of space exploration, on their perspective on humanity, and on their imagination. And with that content, it became really a basis to create the infinite. Because we really wanted to be a human experience about the astronaut journey from the moment they go up to the sky and the moment they come back to Earth. And one of the key moments of the experience, and Paul mentioned it, is the spacewalk. It was the first time that the camera was able to go on the Canadian arm to capture a moment where astronauts are outside of the ISS. And we kind of have a curveball on the project. Maybe it's an anecdote too, but at the beginning when we launched in Montreal, the intention was that our key moment of the experience will be that spacewalk, that people will be able to view that moment. And the shoot was planned on March. I remember because it was spring break. Originally. And then the Canadian arm broke, right? There was something that happened that we couldn't get the content.
There were many things, yeah. But mainly, our camera survived all the tests on the ground in the ISS itself, and then they mounted on the Canada arm, and then they put it out, which takes 8 hours, I think, and then it didn't start. So we had to send another piece of hardware that would fix the problem. And so we fixed the problem, and we did the shoots even more than we originally planned. And it ended up actually being good because it aligned with the spacewalk, which has been also postponed for similar issues, not because of the filming issues, but the ISS is basically an old can flying above space with tons of problems. Like half of their work is to actually maintain the station because it's quite old and there's a lot of issues constantly, and so the schedule is something that constantly delay, and we're just one additional thing that could cause problem. But we did indeed manage to capture more content than IMAX at the end, and I hope for those who were here to see the spacewalk yesterday in the Dome. I hope you enjoyed it because it's a rare piece of content.
So what we did in Montreal, because we didn't have that key element, Felix and Paul create another film based on the overview effect, and it was also, I think, really successful. But as soon as we've captured the content, it was in August, we replaced the content. So now the piece of the infinite that's touring in the States present at the end of the experience, the spacewalk. One of the things that was really important for us in the creation of this project is to add some poetry and have a unique immersive experience added to it. So we wanted to stay away from creating an artifact exhibition and really go into a poetic approach. And the intention was really to present the astronaut journey from the moment they go into space to the moment they come back. And part of that, what we've done is really make sure that we were presenting, yes, a VR experience, but also a onboarding and offboarding experience as well. And as you can see here, it's a pretty large scale exhibition. It's a 13,000 square footage exhibition that is divided in 7 different chapters. And each of those chapters represent an immersive experience in itself. And as you can see here in the pictures, the free roaming area is pretty huge. So it's a 6,000 free roaming space. And maybe for the benefit of everyone, Pierre, can you tell us a little bit on what free roaming means and 6DOF means in the VR world?
So if you're familiar or not with VR experiences in general, you have sort of 2 camps that usually don't live together. We managed to make them live together. But what we call the 3 degrees of freedom, 3DOF, is only based on the orientation of your head, so 3 degrees of rotation, and 6 degrees of freedom add the translation on top of that, which gives you the opportunity to freely move inside the space and orient your head anywhere at any time. So 6 degrees of freedom versus 3 degrees of freedom. Of course, our videos are shot in a way that they are 3 degrees of freedom, even though there could be some movement in the content itself, but the movement is not directed by you, it's directed by the camera. And the 6 degrees of freedom is all the capacity that you have as a physical person in the virtual world to move around a space and have a virtual representation of that space and that movement in a projected virtual space. And the goal of this was to give you the capacity to visit and roam inside the life scale of the ISS itself. So you are moving inside the representation of the ISS that is actually at scale. And if you step out, you don't fall into the void, but you are actually walking in space, where we have disposed also some content that we've shot inside the ISS that are not necessarily spacewalk oriented, but just contemplative film of the Earth from different point of view at different time of the day.
So basically what we're trying to do is basically combine the best of both worlds. You can't quite get photorealism and that freedom of movement. And on the other hand, we have this amazing footage that we couldn't move through, but we combined it with a stylized rendition of the ISS. We didn't want the 2 to compete with each other, so the ISS is this really non-photorealistic, a kind of holographic X-ray version of the ISS. That you can literally walk through the walls even, and we encourage you to do that, to walk outside and get this feeling of walking in space. And so yeah, having both, I think it was elevating both of them really. And a lot of people, for example, have seen the spacewalk or any of our footage in VR at home. They find that being able to walk through and then alternate between 3 degrees of freedom and 6 degrees of freedom brings that physical immersion to the experience, and in general people have a much stronger sense of presence and wonder and just enjoy it much more.
I would say one of the creative challenge on that was that it was really important for the creative team that every hotspot of content was presented exactly where it was shot inside of the ISS. So if we have multiple content related to the US area, for example, then it means that all of those hotspots are at the same space, the same location inside of the ISS. And when you want to do a free roaming experience with 100 visitors at the same time, you wanted to make sure that you're using the space to disperse them in that area so that you avoid collision. So that was like a creative criteria that we really need to maintain, but was that bringing us kind of a puzzle. And I think we solved it in a good way. I don't know, Pierre, if you want to touch base a little bit on that.
Sure. I don't think there's a bad way to fix that, unless like people are running into each other. But yeah, that it's a big challenge to actually guarantee that you spread the crowd in this physical space and making sure nobody bump into each other, but at the same time have the freedom to visit the ISS potentially at the same place. So the crowd that we're talking about, between 100 and 150 people per hour, means that we are pulsing groups of 14 people, up to 14 people every 5 minutes. So, of course, if you present the same content to those people, by same content I mean same content exactly at the same place, everybody will rush at the same places, and and you start to be on the Black Friday before you know it, right? So the point was to actually have the same content but disposed differently virtually for different group of people. So they think they are seeing the same thing, but they don't. They actually see different disposition of the same content but at different place. So it helps spreading those people around, and you keep them grouped by families, so you are sure that if you come with your significant other or your children and everything, everybody can experience actually the same thing at the same place. They can hold hands or making sure everybody's okay. But if you are in the same like group of 14 people but not in the same family, then we keep the freedom of like showing you a different version of the ISS, oriented different in a different fashion and positioned in a different way to help spreading people around.
And that's really important to create that feeling of shared moments, because people are coming together. They wanted to feel it, to experiment it as a collective with their families. So it was a really good way for us to make sure that you're having that feeling of a shared moments. The one thing that we've done also was the integration of the avatar, and now you're represented in this space to avoid those collisions. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, still to achieve the same goal, which is prevent people from bumping into each other. Plus, not even to mention that we opened in the best time ever during the pandemic. So touching each other was already not really politically correct, but also dangerous. So that was a very important constraint to deal with. So the avatar is one very important piece in like how to deliver a compelling experience. But in general, the two elements are like to be able to represent people accurately, you need to track them accurately, so you need to position them exactly where they are, and you need to make sure that every single headset represents them also at the right place. So you need to make sure not only to track them perfectly, but to make the information to circulate extremely fast and rendered with the smallest latency possible, so the avatar that you're seeing in your headset represent the people at the right place and in the right position. So there's different things that we're using for that. We have an external form of tracking that is less disruptive, the least disruptive possible for the experience itself. So there's no like source of visibility from the roof, for example, that could generate occlusion, because at 100 and 150 people at the same time, like they start occluding the visibility of those markers or stuff like that. So it's something that we put on the ground that helps tracking, that is combined with the tracking of the headset, that helps positioning exactly the people. We use the hand tracking of the headset itself, and we do the minimum / quite interesting the top body part reconstitution. So we have like skeleton rigging in real time, where with the orientation of the head and the position of the hands, we can reconstitute the top body of the avatar. So you can see the avatars orienting their head correctly, doing like hand gesture correctly, so you can wave at someone and stuff like that, and with the proper degrees of latency, so you're not bumping into each other. And we are representing the avatars in 3 different colors. People that are not necessarily in your family are represented in blue, so you see, of course, a lot of blue avatars. Yellows are the people in the same family. So if you're with your young children and he's running away, you can spot him quite easily in the blue mess, and you can see those yellow avatars from afar versus the other ones. We just display them at proximity to avoid bumping into them. And the last one is the operators. We have a bunch of operators on site to help you if you're feeling uncomfortable, or if you have a technical problem, or if you have any question. So they are represented in green, so you can actually reach out for them. And we have tons of explanation at the beginning of the experience how to get their attention if you're in trouble. But there's no trouble.
It's really worth mentioning that the avatars, obviously we couldn't make them look like your own body, so we made them also very stylized, these kind of stardust beings. I don't think we had. You did? Yeah?
It was earlier.
It was earlier.
Okay. Well, anyway, you got a glimpse of them. So that was important for you to create an avatar that you could immediately connect to, even though it didn't look anything like you, and also to transcend the limitations of the hardware we're using. We're rendering everything on the Quest 2, which is not a very powerful device. It's essentially as strong as your phone. And so the same way that we didn't want to compete with the actual humans you were going to see in the footage, we wanted to lean as far away as possible from a human likeness as possible, while creating something that was poetic and beautiful and easily identifiable, and also kind of universal.
Pierre touched base a little bit on the operators on site. So to create these kinds of projects, we have 16 people operating each hours to make sure that we pulse group of 14 people every 5 minutes. And each of them has a different role. So they are all essentials to the experience. And we kind of create new job with that. You know, we never thought before doing it that we will create VR guardians or specialists at onboarding, or some people now that are working on a UV station cleaning headsets at a really quick time in a very we need to turn over the headset and recharge, and in between. And just to operate the Infinite in the backstage, we have 400 headsets that are connected, and they all going to be used in the same operating day. So it was also an operating challenge to put together. And to do that, we've developed different tools that really facilitate the work of our mediator on the floor. Pierre, I don't know if you wanted to touch base a little bit on the different things that we've created to manage the flow mostly, and make sure, because when people is getting out of the experience for a battery reason or any other trouble that could happen, the only thing you want is to bring them back into the experience as quickly as possible, so you need to know what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, so basically the Infinite can look like a bit like an online multiplayer game. Like, I don't know if you're familiar. Online multiplayer game, but it's basically this, but in one place. So the what we call the client is what the headset is rendering for every single user, but there's a central point to the experience, which is the server that contains the backend and a series of tools that help bringing the necessary visibility to all the different roles of the operation on site, and us as a support team remotely. So you have a bunch of tools that are hosted on tablets or on big screens in different places of the experience, backstage of course, that help the operator to know exactly what's going on. They have a live representation of the map that we can also look from afar. That gives you different quick state of every user. So if someone has a battery problem, or the temperature is raising, if they have a problem with the computer vision aspect of the experience, if they are late to the flow of the experience as well. Usually it's people that are a bit lost and don't know exactly what to do, even though we tried the maximum to have something intuitive, but you can't, guarantee that everybody can react to the experience. So we bring a lot of signal to those operators so they can intervene and make sure people are okay, and solve their problem as quickly as possible. So not only the live representation, but we can dive in and have more detail of their condition right now in terms of hardware and personally, so they can pinpoint exactly the solution at the right moment. And also remotely, we have the capacity to deep dive into situation, because they could come from the situation on site or a technical problem in the infrastructure as well. Could be the networking, could be down to power. We can see if there's power outage in different places of the experience, so we can contact someone on site. The operators themselves are really occupied by the reality of the individuals, so they don't really have time to check everything at every time. So we have a small team to assist them from afar and can explain why some recurrent situation could happen or anything. So at the rate of the audience, problems start to appear 1 time, 2 times, 10 times, and then it slowly escalates. And so far we've been able to address everything either on the go or extremely quickly when it's quite severe. So those tools are very efficient.
Pierre was talking a little bit about the intuitive nature of the project we need to create, and out of the visitors we have, 78% of the visitors has never put a VR headset on before. So creating moments that are intuitive, sometimes we had a lot of learnings. In the first week we were there every day to really see, is the visitor able to understand the code of the experience? Can they move forward by themselves? And we've realized at one point that we needed to change a little bit the narrative to be a little bit more directive. There's one moment in the experience when we go to do the spacewalk where you need to trust that there is a chair, and that the chair that is pointing up to you is really there. You can have a seat, you can go and sit down. And one of the things that was pretty funny at the beginning is that couples are coming at the experience and they are holding hands and they don't want to let go. And it's kind of, they couldn't believe that they don't have the same chairs, that they need to go in a different direction. So it's kind of at one point you need to integrate a more direct message to the experience to facilitate that. But we think that as we go and as people are getting more experience to these kinds of new formats, that they will trust that the physical and the virtual are really talking and dialoguing with each other. I know we don't have more time, so maybe if we can take some questions. But one thing I wanted to say before that is that, and Paul, correct me if my number is not right, but right now there's about 200 astronauts that has a chance to go inside the ISS. And with the Infinite, there's more than 170,000 people right now who went. And it's only been 1 year since we're touring. So we're really looking to bring much more people into space with the project.